Israel is in the grip of its worst domestic crisis in decades. Since the beginning of this year, thousands of Israelis have been protesting weekly against the proposed judicial overhaul. The judicial changes will allow the lawmakers to scrap Supreme Court rulings with a simple majority vote. The controversial reforms have deeply divided the Israeli society, besides eliciting a significant pushback from the Israeli people. But the undeterred Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has called these reforms as nothing more than a minor correction. But critics and opponents of these reforms have said that these judicial changes will undermine Israel's democracy by weakening its judicial system. Effectively, they have turned the judicial system in Israel subservient to its executive. Our next report gets you the details.
Streets of Tel Aviv have been roiled anew by protests. On the 27th of July, thousands of Israelis returned to the streets of Tel Aviv to protest against the parliament's approval on Monday of a key component of the controversial judicial reforms package. They waved Israeli flags and chanted "Democracy, democracy" in Tel Aviv, which has emerged as an epicenter of the demonstrations since the judicial overhaul package was first unveiled in January this year. Thursday's protests mark the 30th week of these weekly protests. These protests have drawn support from opposition lawmakers, as well as secular and religious groups, blue-collar and tech sector workers, peace activists, and even military reservists, a potential blow to the country's operational readiness. Protesters were angered by the Prime Minister Netanyahu's ruling coalition's ramrodding of a bill on Monday that limits the reasonableness clause.
I'm here to continue demonstrating against this horrible government. We will not let them continue with the judicial overhaul. The passing of this draconic law will not stand the Supreme Court, and we have trust in the Supreme Court to cancel this law. At the same time, we will not stop demonstrating against this government, against its plans, and against the collapse of the Israeli economy, the Israeli security, and the Israeli united strength that has kept us such a strong country for 75 years.
The reasonableness clause is used by the Supreme Court to overturn the government decisions which the court deems unconstitutional. Lawmakers passed the bill with 64 votes in the 120-seat chamber after opposition lawmakers boycotted the bill, chanting "Shame, shame." After the vote, protesters demonstrated late into the night, with police resorting to water cannons and mounted officers to disperse them. Dozens of protesters were arrested as well. The next day, 4 leading Israeli newspapers covered their front pages in black ink. The only words at the bottom of the pages written in a line were, "A black day for Israeli democracy." A defiant Prime Minister who faces a string of corruption allegations is accused of trying to use the reforms to quash possible judgments against him. Netanyahu, though, chose to pin the blame on judicial courts, calling them arrogant and the reforms a course correction.
We have the most activist judicial court on the planet, and it's arrogated for itself powers from the government, from the executive, and the legislative branches. So we're trying to correct it, but I want to bring the pendulum to the middle. I don't want to bring the pendulum to the other side. There's a middle ground there, and I hope we can achieve it. But that's why we're doing it. Imagine that in the United States, the Supreme Court could tell the executive, the president, okay, they could say, we are nullifying any one of your decisions just based on something that we think is unreasonable. You would not accept it. We don't accept it. But we have to correct it, and that's what we just did. It's a minor correction. It's described as the end of Israeli democracy. I think that's silly, and when the dust settles, everybody will see that.
Civil rights groups have submitted petitions to the Supreme Court urging for the new law to be overturned. The controversial judicial overhaul has also threatened to strain ties with the Biden administration, jeopardize the country's new alliances with the Arab nations, and further deepen the decades-long Israel-Palestine conflict. Given the headstrong approach of Netanyahu's hard-right government, Israel finds itself hurtling onto a path riddled with chaos and bedlam.